There are some defining moments in your life as a filmmaker and as a film enthusiast, and as a film festival worker. And as all three, I count among those moments the days that I met each of these three people, and this moment absolutely standing up with them. Barbara has been such a friend to the festival over the years. We're so proud to have her bring her new film, Miss Sharon Jones, which had its first screening today, has 2 more screenings this week. You should absolutely check it out. It's fantastic. And of course, we're incredibly honored to have the namesakes of our new award, the Pennebaker Hegedus Award for Excellence in Documentary Filmmaking. And to tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to give it over to the Sarasota Film Festival's favorite frequent guest, Barbara Koppel.
Well, I'm totally honored to be here to help celebrate Chris and Penny and getting this phenomenal award in their name. Chris and Penny are just exquisite filmmakers and exquisite human beings. They're humanitarians. They do everything with passion and everything with love. They support filmmakers. Their names are on as executive producer helping a young filmmaker. I always see them at our films coming down to support us and having mentors that they'll talk to and teach them anything they need to know. They are the real deal. They are really beautiful human beings, and I find it so lucky in my life to know you both and to love you both as much as I do. They also have a family business, and Fraser Pennebaker, who produces some of their films and runs their company, he is just as sweet. If you call him up and you ask him something technical or you ask him to find something, he just goes out of his way to try to find something for you. And who could ever forget Don't Look Back, Penny's masterful film about Bob Dylan, or The War Room that Chris and Penny did together with Bill Clinton's run for the White House. And just to show how innovative and incredible they are, no, they were not going to get to hang out with Bill Clinton. So they did something even better. They got inside the war room. They got to hear all the strategies and everything of the ups and the downs of the campaign, and took us into the underbody and into the soul and into the heart, so they can be incredible. If something doesn't go the way they first thought, they'll just go around another corner and come up with something equally wonderful. For me, Pennebaker was really phenomenal when I did my first film called Harlan County, USA. He was the moderator at the New York Film Festival, and he also helped me get a grant that I needed so badly, the National Endowment for the Arts. He was on the jury, and I had sent a clip of this woman, Bessie Lou Cornett, standing up in a courtroom after she and a lot of the miners' wives and miners were arrested, and she stood up and she said, "Laws aren't made for the working people in this country." And Penny saw that, and he just slammed his fist on the table and he said, "She darn well better get a grant." So, and I did. So it is with great privilege and great love to present this inaugural award to the Hegedus and Pennebaker for excellence in documentary filmmaking. And I also want to thank the Sarasota Film Festival for caring so much about our community, and for you, Penny and Chris, for caring so much. And I think whoever gets this prestigious award has some very big shoes to fit in. Thank you. Oh, and this is it. Wow.
How many people live in Sarasota that are in the room? Oh, so you do have a ton of Sarasota. How many do not live in Sarasota? There you go.
Welcome.
Good representation of not in Sarasota, too. So obviously we do not have time to go through every single one of your great movies. We would be here for all day and all day tomorrow.
And we can't remember that.
That's right.
That's a problem, too.
And I've out of 3 or 4 times, this is like the 3rd or 4th time in the last 13 months I've interviewed one or both of them, and so I'm running out of interesting ways to ask similar questions. So I think what I may do is I may ask you a couple of, hey, tell them the story about X, right? And then I want to ask a couple of questions about you working together, and then we'll throw it out to the audience, because I know there's actually a lot of filmmakers. How many in the audience are filmmakers?
1, 2. Well, sorry.
So you got a lot of filmmakers that I know are going to want to ask questions. Let me start out by saying, gosh, I was going to ask you some stuff about founding Drew Associates and making Primary, because I thought, what's remarkable to me is that you made what was, to that point, I think, the greatest political documentary ever, and then you all got together and made the greatest political documentary again with The War Room. But I'm going to skip over Primary, because I know people want to hear about Don't Look Back, of course. And we talked about, last time we were together, we talked about the great New York Times quote that the joke will be on us in 50 years if Bob Dylan is regarded as a major poet, right? That's a direct quote from the New York Times when Don't Look Back came out. And I guess the joke is on the New York Times. Penny knew better. I would love it if you would tell them the story about when you were filming Bob, just what you thought was just kind of messing around on the piano, and he saw the footage, and you remember what he asked you?
Well, we never... hello? Is anybody there? Right. We never really talked much about the film after it was done. And I wasn't sure whether they were going to try to take an active hand or not, and they didn't. They let me do anything, all where I was on my own. And after the film, it was finished, but I still kind of was making some changes in it. I was afraid maybe it was too long for non-Dylan freaks, and so there was a scene in there where he's playing the piano, and the thing is, he plays the piano in order to hear the song the way he's going to sing it, but it sounds like very sort of clunky piano playing. If you, I don't want to offend him if he's happened to be here somewhere, but it's kind of interesting to listen to. But I thought, it isn't. He's not playing the piano like a real pianist might, and maybe that's too long. So maybe I'll cut it. So I'd cut it down and send him a copy of the print. And he called me up one day and he said, we were talking about some other things, and then he said, by the way, I just want to ask you a question. Have you ever filmed anybody writing a song? And I said, no, I never have. And that was all. He never said another word. But I put everything back in.
That was enough said from Bob, huh?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit I'm sure that everyone here is familiar with the sort of basics of what the idea of direct cinema was, but why don't you talk a little bit sort of from the horse's mouth about what you and Drew and the Maisels and that group, what you were trying to do differently than you had seen before?
Well, it was never clear. I think that the magazine was probably
Life magazine.
Life magazine. Probably the people at the top could see that it was heading for the rocks, but down at the bottom we couldn't see anything. I think that the idea was that we understood, but this was just at the bottom of the fishbowl. So that Life was considering buying ABC. So they'd become a television broadcast, and they would use whatever they knew about journalism to sort of go in and of course a lot of people thought this was foolish because they said television isn't journalism. Some people are trying to make it that, but the fact is it's pure entertainment, and that's all you can sell. You can't, the way you make money out of it is you sell advertising.
Sure.
Anyway, this was all going on, and Drew, in the beginning, he was told, see what you can do to make some kind of ongoing film program that shows the kind of things that the magazine had showed, the things going on behind the doors, the things going on in private rooms. And of course, that's not so easily done. Although, as a Life correspondent, he probably had better access to doing it than anyone else. And in the course of putting these things together, Drew began, like everybody else, Drew really wanted to make movies, just like we did. But he was starting by making kind of interesting little things, like he'd fly an airplane and have it do an outside loop so that everybody in it was flying around without gravity. And he'd film it. And you'd show this to people who'd never seen people flying around without. Well, it's interesting for about 5 seconds. But it was hardly what the magazine had in mind. But little by little, we kind of got to the point where we made this film in Santa Monica at a place that was where all junkies hung out. And it had no bars on the windows. You could put yourself in there if you were on drugs and get out of the drugs by just not taking them, because there was no drugs in the place. And in the course of it, you could leave any time you wanted, but if you left, you could never come back. And that kind of mystical concept held everybody in that house, just like a big bear hug. And in the course of making this film, we all found we were making a film, a real film, with not actors, but with characters who talked to each other. And Joe Pass, who was playing with their little band they had, we had fantastic music. It was just as exciting a movie as you could imagine making out in Hollywood. And Drew got caught up in it, as everybody did. So from then on, we kept looking for movies to make. And in the end, that kind of wasn't what the magazine had in mind, I don't think, because they had no way to distribute them. They didn't know what to do with them when we made them. So it was kind of in a way, it was a loss, but not for us. We all could see how to do it, and in the course of doing it, it needed to have a camera, a special kind of camera that you could carry around. I liked having it on my shoulder because I could hold it very steady. And the camera had to be synchronous. That is, you had to be able to shoot dialogue, so that, like a play or a theater, the plot took place, as it went on, and you saw things happening as they happened. You didn't have to have somebody tell you what was happening. And we were able to make that camera, and Life was, I don't think they always understood they were paying for it, but they were paying for it, and they paid quite a bit. But, in the end, my gratitude was to to Drew, who when he started working at Life, people said, well, and Life was like a very tight family. Everybody went and played the game on Wednesday nights and had dinners together. And you were caught up in this little family thing, and you were sort of supposed to be part of the family. And Drew had no experience with ever having worked on a magazine or in journalism or anything. So, somebody asked him, and they said, well, what are you going to tell people about yourself that's going to make them welcome you into the family? He said, just tell them I'm the fighter pilot. And boy, that was it. From then on, everybody in the magazine loved him and wanted to thing. But the magazine was, it went under, and the films, none of the films ever got really released. So they all became little children that never had a home. But that's where I learned how to make real movies, and not just the things I'd made before would be a 5-minute film on the Third Avenue L or something. Yeah. And a real movie, you're like a playwright. You got to get these people that nobody's ever seen before on a stage. You got to get them to talk to each other and tell each other what's going to happen. And then the big thing in writing or in theater always is, then what happened? And you're able to take that idea and document it in a sense with real film, with real images. And that's as exciting as movies can get.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
That's probably more than you want to know.
No, it's great. No, this is the great thing about interviewing Chris and Penny is that a few questions go a long way. It's
Chris
wonderful.
says I blab too much sometimes. Right.
This is my last question before we get to the point in the storyline where Chris enters the scene.
Okay,
so don't think
there
I'm
quickly.
ignoring Chris. We're going to get there.
Okay.
I'm here.
So after making, as I say, primary, probably the greatest political doc up to that point, and then making what is still, I think, the greatest music doc of all time, Don't Look Back, which then provided that, and some subsequent filming provided a lot of the basis for another one of the greatest documentaries, No Direction Home, right? Didn't Scorsese use a lot of your footage from? Yeah. So then all he did was went out and made probably the second greatest music documentary of all time, which some people would say is the first greatest, Monterey Pop, which is amazing. And you should all check out all hours of it because it's incredible. And I just want you to tell about how you decided to sort of deploy your army of cameramen and your sort of, I guess, shoot your tactical model for getting Monterey Pop captured.
Well, somebody called me up from California and said, how would you like to make a film about a concert film about a music festival, which is going to happen in Monterey? And I said, sounds like a great idea. And then I thought for 2 minutes, and I thought, I haven't the faintest idea how to do that. And I had never shot a film with, usually the films that I made all by myself in the kitchen, and edited them in the kitchen. So the idea of taking a huge concert of people that I really didn't know very well, and the only person I really knew was Otis, because Dylan and I had gone to a place when he was playing in Los Angeles, and I'd heard him there, and I just was knocked out, particularly by the band that played with him. Those trumpets were fantastic. Anyway, so in the course of trying to figure out what to do, the problem was that nobody had really made a music concert film except that you could set up a camera on a tripod and get a crew and shoot. They did this up at years before, what? Newport, yeah. But they had to use 35 millimeter black and white. And the film was wonderful, only it was not really, it also had a sense of being set up for the camera, which it was. So I kept thinking, how can you, when I go to these festivals, I don't know what I'm going to see. And things surprise me, and I love that aspect of it, concert film. And especially the bands that play, some of them I'm going to be surprised and not like, and some I'm going to be surprised and love. So how do you get that sense built into the filming of it? And but we by then had made 6 of these cameras. They were very handmade. They looked like something you'd made in your basement, which this is where they were made, really. But the guys that had worked with me in New York, helping to make them and helping to just do the stuff that we did to pay the rent, I kind of trusted them because I knew that what I knew about the music that was going to be played at this concert, they knew as much or more than I did about it. So what we did was we went out there with our 6 cameras, which every waking moment, I knew that they were going to break down. I knew that something was going to go wrong right in the. And we had people like Janis Joplin appearing almost for the first time, and people like that. And I thought, it's going to fuck up everything, you know. But we got to do it. There's no other way to do it, because you've got to be able to take a camera and go backstage or on stage, which is where I spent time, and film things as they happened. You couldn't have a big camera set up somewhere with a crew of 5 all running it, making the concert come to the camera. Anyway, we went up to do it, and in the morning, there was a place, what was it called? The place that we used to go to with the waffles. What was it?
Pancake House?
Pancake House. Pancake House. We would all assemble at the Pancake House, and everybody would get a camera and 2 or 3 rolls of, 400-foot rolls of Ektachrome, which was very new, the Ektachrome, and I wouldn't see anybody till dark. Then they come back and they give me the film they'd shot, and I would send it to the lab, and nobody ever got directed by anybody, much less me. And when we started looking at the stuff we'd shot in New York, we couldn't look at it there. That screening room was filled with just everybody I'd ever heard of, including Ravi Shankar and his little band that he had. And everybody would come in. The place smelled just very loudly of marijuana. So I was absolutely certain we would all get arrested. But we spent 2 or 3 days, day and night, 24 hours, that the projector never stopped. And people came, and we looked at the stuff we had, and I thought, Jesus, that is the only way to make a music festival film, because everything, Al would go out, and it wasn't just the way people shot the performances. Al would go out in the wagons where people were sleeping at night out in the football fields, and he would shoot people that interested him, and they were much wonderful, and so that's Al Maisels. And so I thought, no matter what I could have done, there's no way I could have gotten more interesting material than just turning these people loose. And the only professional cameraman was Ricky. And later, the union brought us up for charges because we hadn't. And Ricky said, we got to do this thing. And I said, Ricky, we can't do that. We'll get arrested. We went into the meeting for the charges, and I had a little watch recorder, tape recorder thing that you couldn't, it just looked like a watch, but it was in fact somewhere on my body. It was doing tape. And he had a little camera, tiny little camera, and we filmed them bringing the charges against him, and we gave him a copy of the film. And they gave everything up because they said it's not possible.
It's perfect. All right, now is the point in our narrative when Chris Hegedus comes into the story.
Yeah.
1976, right?
It's our 40th anniversary of working together this year, so yeah.
That's fantastic. Starting your 5th decade of making movies together. That's fantastic.
Sounds old.
And I believe the first film that you made together was The Energy War, right? Do I have my facts right on that?
Yeah, I
First
mean, that was
feature?
the first major film. I mean, I had edited Town Bloody Hall and Jingle Bells and several other films that we shot, but that was the first.
And what had I can only expect that at this point your motives were purely professional, not personal yet. What was it that what about his work specifically, other than all the obvious?
The camera.
What inspired you?
The
Was
camera.
it the camera?
Well, first of all, I didn't even think women could make movies when I grew up. There were really no women role models at all. And, so I became an artist, and I went to art school and started making experimental films. But the time I went to art school also was a time when art totally deconstructed itself, and there was no art object left at all. So I became more and more interested in filmmaking, and I rented all these films. I put on a film festival, and in the experimental film catalog, I think it was Grove Press, were the Cinema Verite films, which were, as Penny said, they were not shown, those early Drew films. You could rent them, but it's not like they were on television or anything. And so I had heard about them, so I rented them, and that was it. It just changed my life. I saw Primary, which was the film that they did. It was the first film, and it was on Kennedy and Humphrey's primary in Wisconsin. And it just, it put me back to that point in my life. And a lot of those films did, because you just so much had the feeling of being there. So, I changed my life. I moved to Michigan, where they had one of the very first film festivals. There weren't very many in the country. It was the Ann Arbor Film Festival. And went to that, and I got a job with a surgeon who had like the American Cancer Society, except it was for burns. And he saw himself as a director. He had bought all the camera equipment and everything, and he hired George C. Scott and his wife to be in the promo film. And so I went to work for him as a job, and started to make films, and eventually moved to New York. And I saw the film Jane, as I said in your promo, and it really made me go, say, I'm going to, work with these people. It's very expensive. There were very few places to rent cameras at that point. So I went to Bob Drew, actually, and I asked Bob and Ann if they needed anybody to help them, and they didn't, and they sent me to Penny, and that's really how I met him. And he just had a wall full of films things that he had shot. Town Bloody Hall was one of the first films, which was this amazing forum that happened in New York, where all these women, Germaine Greer, the head of National Organization for Women, Jill Johnson from The Voice, all had a so-called debate with Norman Mailer on the stage that turned into this incredible kind of free-for-all in the audience. But, it was fascinating. So I set out to do that, and eventually we started the Energy War. And during that process, Barbara came in with her film. And that's the thing about the 70s, is that there were women that were filmmakers. And one of the things about Jane was that Jane Penny made with Hope Ryden, a woman filmmaker. And those type of things really, gave me kind of the courage and inspired me. And Barbara was definitely one of them, because she had made this extraordinary film, Harlan County. It was kind of all in pieces, and I hooked it up on the dubber for you, I remember, and you came in with all your editors, a lot of them women, and showed this extraordinary film.
It was the first place that Harlan County was ever shown.
That's right, we showed it there.
In my years,
It was
and I
still
threw
rough.
up all the way home.
You did? Well,
God.
I thought it was
That
wonderful.
was exciting, though.
That you guys were there, and Charlotte Swearin was there, and all these people that I deeply respected, and I couldn't believe that you were looking at this film.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
That turned out pretty well for everybody concerned, I think. that one.
When she came, we were about to go back. In fact, we'd been put into bankruptcy, but the thing hadn't. It had taken 2 or 3 days for it to take place. So we were already thinking, well, how to move. And she came in and wanted to know if we had a job for her, and I sort of hemmed and hawed. And that night I thought, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we must never let her leave. And so the next day I called and said, well, we found a job for you here, which was all the stuff that I'd shot. And I just sort of gave it, I said, figure out what to do with it and edit it. You know, I can only tell you that in the hour or two that we spent talking in that office, I could see that she was the kind of person that I wanted to be a filmmaker with me, to be a partner with me. And I don't know how I knew that or what had happened to it specifically, but there was no question in my mind that that was the way it was going to be for the rest of my life. And it was. She never left it.
And once again, that ended up working out pretty well for everybody, including all of us. I've got to ask you a quick War Room question, then these people are going to kill me if I don't let them ask questions. So Barbara put her finger on it in her intro. The vast majority of filmmakers, when they embarked on this film and were told, well, you're really not going to have much access to the candidate, would have gone, okay, what's the next project? Tell me about realizing, you know, that, I mean, in hindsight, it looks so obvious that if you had James frickin' Carville and George Stephanopoulos and Paul Begala that you'd have a great movie. But how in the moment did you sort of make that decision to, no, we're going to make this movie about the players in the game, not just the guy at the top?
Well, you know, it wasn't as kind of romantic and planned as you're saying. You know, filmmaking is really a process. And, you know, we had, you know, two other groups of people walk into our office and say, this is an exciting election year, you should do something about it. And we kind of, you know, said, you know, come back with money. And we had tried to do something the year before with Dukakis, and we had a lot of access. And we really couldn't get enough money to do it. So when Wendy Ettinger and R.J. Cutler kind of walked in our door, and they hadn't made films before, but they had seen Primary, and they thought it was a year to make this type of film. So we basically said, you know, well, go out and see if you can get some money and access and come back. And, you know, they came back about a week later and said, you know, well, we, you know, went and saw all the different campaigns, and, you know, obviously we can't get into the Bush campaign, White House won't let us in, and, you know, the other candidates, you know, weren't that interested, and, you know, but we did talk to the Clinton campaign, and they said that Bill Clinton had a photographer and a journalist following him. So unfortunately, you can't film him, but you can film the campaign staff. And we were like, because in New York, I mean, Clinton was from Arkansas. We're in New York. He was, who the hell is Bill Clinton? You know, nobody knew who he was. He wasn't like a favored candidate at all. So, you know, getting the staff of, you know, this unknown candidate was a little like the booby prize. But we kept thinking, you know, we'll follow him, and Clinton will see Penny and I, and he'll love us, and he'll let us in. And you know, he did love us when he saw us, and we did film him a little bit, and he was, you know, incredibly Bill Clinton, charming. You know, he just like gave you this handshake that you thought you were the most important person in the world at that moment, type of thing. But you know, he had a lot of protectors around him, the friends of Bill. And, you know, they didn't really want us around. And, you know, we kind of went through a lot of the different people, you know, as part of his staff, trying to find, you know, somebody to film. And, you know, one day we just stumbled in on James Carville. And, you know, he was like somebody's drunken uncle at a party or something. But everybody told us he was, you know, in charge of charge of strategy for the campaign. So, you know, and he was this kind of co-schemer with George Stephanopoulos, and they were such opposite buddies. They just seemed like, okay, well, this is our story. But, you know, right until the end, you know, we kept hoping to get in with Bill Clinton because, I mean, James Carville, you know, as you know, genius and charming and interesting as he was not very well known then. So, you know, you just wondered, well, will we have a film here? Will we have a film here?
You had a film there. All that did was become the new greatest political documentary of all time. So really fantastic. And by the way, the last thing I'll say, I was in the academic publishing industry for like 6 years. I don't think I've told you all this before, in political science publishing. And of all the hundreds of political science professors that I spoke with over 6 years, War Room is the one movie that they wouldn't say when they were going to reference it. They wouldn't say, now have you seen the War Room? You've seen that part where they would just assume that if you were in this job, you had to have seen the War Room. They would say, you remember in War Room when he does da-da-da-da-da, whatever. So you've become the de facto standard.
Did you ever see we made a film in 2008 called The Return of the War Room? I don't know if you ever seen it.
I have not seen The Return of the War Room.
Wonderful.
We went back and kind of talked to everybody from the different campaigns, including from the Perot campaign, and I really wanted to get the love story between Mary and James, because that was kind of like always this underlying thing in the campaign where, you know, they were a couple, but they couldn't see each other because they were working for different camps the whole time. So anyway, Mary and James tell their story about how James sprung on Mary, and after he had promised he wouldn't work for a Democratic, presidential campaign while she was, working with Bush, that he was going to work with Clinton. And she said she basically, like you, Barbara, she went in the bathroom and threw up, and came back. But it's interesting. I mean, especially in a very volatile election year like this year, to kind of go back and revisit what all these people thought during that year. Because having Perot in the race, which who knows if we'll have a third-party candidate in this race, was a very interesting aspect of that campaign.
A thing that was interesting, particularly for us, was we knew these people. By now, they were like relatives, at Thanksgiving dinner or something, and at that point, the phone had changed. From there, when we were doing the film, they had to fax each other stuff. Now, onto the phone. So if you were running around with a microphone, you weren't too welcome if they were on their phone. But the thing that was intriguing was, every single morning, those, I think, 4 or 5 people, George, James,
Stan Greenberg, Mandy, Rahm Emanuel.
Every single morning, they talk to each other, and still do. And that's such an incredible idea when you think about those minds encapsulating whatever's happened the 12 hours between calls. It heartens me, I'll tell you. I feel better about what's going on.
Okay, I think we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. Don't kill me, filmmakers. I know. I'll try to call on you first, I promise. Who has questions that they would like to ask our living legends here on the stage, back there in the back?
Hi, my name is Jackie Solano, and ironically, the name of my company is Direct Cinemas in the Verite. I've made a couple of films here locally since 2005, since living here in Sarasota from Los Angeles. And do you remember doing The Chicken Ranch? Is that one of your films that you did for Lucas?
A Chicken Ranch.
That film was done by Nick Broomfield. Yeah. No.
Which one?
Grierson?
Did Grierson work with Robert Drew? You could say who Grierson was in the history of documentary.
It didn't really. I mean, I kind of met him and knew him. In fact, I think he gave me a prize in England somewhere. But he was really. He got involved with the Canadian Film Board and helped them set up their operation to customize Eskimos, I guess, for their programming or whatever they did. But and we used the film board was one of the models we used in working to set up the thing at Drew. But the fact is that they didn't have a sync camera either, and so they had to rent our sync camera because Arriflex had promised them a sync camera but hadn't delivered one. So they were still looking for fulfillment somehow, and Grierson had then long departed and gone back to Scotland. So he didn't really have much to do with us, I know.
Gotcha. Is there a question here too?
Yeah, it might be kind of boring, but I'm just curious about like the cameras you made, and when you say sync sounds, do you like have sound guys running around with you, or were you like recording sound yourself while you were filming? Like,
Wants to know about sync sound. Did you have sound guys going around with
No,
you?
he- Yeah. The camera was an Oricon camera, which was a 16 millimeter movie camera at the time, but it wasn't didn't have synchronous sound. You had to either be attached by a wire to it, and all the equipment was quite cumbersome. So basically what they did was try to re-engineer the camera to make it run separately from the tape recorder.
The thing was, we felt very emboldened because we had Life magazine behind us. We thought, we can spend anything here. There's no limit. And so we went to a guy who was one of the best camera designers in the world, actually, and whose camera, he made a camera that was a professional camera. You racked it over to do, but it was really a beautiful camera, very quiet. And he said, what are you using now? And we showed him this tired old Archon that we butchered, and chopped it up and put everything on. It was goofy. And he played it, and he listened to it, and he said, this camera is probably the best camera you're going to find, because it has, unlike the 16s that existed, they were all rebuilt to resemble the 35 cameras that they kind of were made from. And so that they had pull-down claws and things that would jump into the sprocket hole and hold it in place. And he said the thing about this camera, it's wonderful, is because 16 millimeter film is so light, it isn't like 35. You don't have to clamp it down. You can let it stream through the place where the picture takes place. You can let it stream through, and that's going to be fairly quiet and simple. So we went back, and we just rebuilt that camera and made it so, and I used an Araflex handle on the front to hold it and put a switch on it. So you turned the camera on and off with your thumb, and there was no other switches. That's all. That's the only, unlike cameras that you have now that's covered with switches. But that camera was, it works so well because having it on your shoulder, you can get it against the cheekbone, which holds your eye very tight, so that it was very steadier than trying to hold it this way, especially when you were using a long lens and a zoom, which we used, always a zoom. That we first started, we made various models of it, but the first one that really worked was at Synanon, from a film called David, about a musician. And from then on, that camera just made itself for us. It was, up until, and Boviola came over and spent a lot of time looking at it and taking it apart and making the Aton. And what he did that surprised me, well, that Aton had the most beautiful optics. And when I saw that camera, that was the end of our, we didn't need, I mean, it was such a fantastic camera to use, and it went on your shoulder, it balanced, it had everything that we tried to make it, but it was just so much better made. The French, and I think the French government put up the money for it, so they had like Life magazine behind them, and that was good.
But we did work with a separate sound person, if that's what you were asking about that. There usually was a team, a camera person and a sound person.
I think we got time for one more. I'm really sorry. They are going to be at their Q&A tomorrow for Unlocking the Cage, which you should all see, their new film, which you saw a little bit of here.
And how did you get involved with Unlocking the Cage?
Great final question.
Well, like a lot of our films, somebody walks in the door and kind of introduces us to some person or subject, and that's really what happened here. And we met Stephen Wise, who is an animal rights attorney who for 30 years has been trying to get, better conditions and lives for animals. And, when he started 30 years ago, people used to bark when he walked into a courtroom. And, he just kept at it to the point where he actually was ready to mount some really meaningful type of lawsuits. And that's really what this film is about.
The thing about the documentary, for me, what gives it its kind of theatrical strength is if you begin with the beginning of the story. You know, it's like you don't find Caesar in Gaul and have somebody tell you how he got there. You watch him go. You watch everything that happens. So you understand, in a way, what comes next when it happens. And when he came in to see us, he had been working on trying to figure out ways to help animals for 30 years, he said. But he'd finally figured out that the one way to do it that would work was law. Because all our lives are bounded by law. And animals were things like a chair, so you could buy one and shoot it, you know, as long as it wasn't a person. And his plan was, if I make a court take and make a chimpanzee a person, a legal person, for the purposes of the lawsuit, that would solve their problem. Just like it would any child born who maybe has a water on the brain or something, you still can't kill it or eat it or anything. You have to treat it. The law requires that you're treated as a person. And I kind of thought he's this beginning of the really hard thing of going to the law, and that's what we were always looked for, was to get in at the beginning. So it seemed like such a tempting thing, and of course we knew it was going to be long. We didn't realize it would be 4 or 5 years, but
Not that long.
the idea of watching a thing start and go someplace, that's what makes documentaries work, I think.
Beautiful.
Oh. So see,
I have one thing I want to end on. Thank you so much for joining us. In the magazine that I write for, Paste Magazine, we have a series called The Greats, where we write about people who are over 80 who are still with us, so that we can talk about them while they're alive. We always write these great tributes to people after they're gone, and we thought, let's write tributes about people while they're still with us that have made it to this milestone of 80. And so my dear friend Tim Grierson wrote about you, and of course about your partnership as well. This was his final paragraph. I thought it was really beautiful. Documentary filmmakers don't always command the public's attention the way a narrative feature director can. But Pennebaker's peers noticed. In 2012, he received an honorary Oscar, the Academy saluting the man, quote, who redefined the language of film and taught a generation of filmmakers to look to reality for inspiration, end quote. In his acceptance speech, he barely talked about himself, instead focusing on the subjects of his films and his love for Hegedus. Quote, the only thing that ever bothered me was being a fly on the wall, he once said to TCM about his work. I didn't like to feel like a fly on the wall. I'd much rather be a friend in the room. In their films, we were all invited. So thank you in your films for inviting us into these rooms.
Thank you, Michael.
Barbara, if you'll join us again for a photo. You get a photo of all of us with the award. Thank y'all so much. Please come out to see Unlocking the Cage. Okay, I'm going to step out and let you get the 3 filmmakers.
Can I have one up here, looking up here for just 1 second, right up here? Up here. Up here. Thank you.
All right, now I need one too down here.